He thought they didn't belong there, but in less than 60 seconds, he would realize he had just insulted the very people who could erase his entire career without raising their voices. The glass doors of Beaumont Jewelers opened with a soft chime, the kind that usually welcomed clients dressed in tailored suits and polished confidence. Not a couple like Emily and Daniel Carter, who stepped inside quietly, their presence almost too simple for the glittering world around them. The showroom stretched wide under warm golden lights, rows of diamonds catching reflections like tiny constellations, each display case whispering wealth, exclusivity, and unspoken rules about who was worthy to stand there. Emily paused for a moment, her eyes gently scanning a row of engagement rings, not with hunger or envy, but with a calm familiarity, as if she had seen pieces like these before in quieter, more private rooms, while Daniel stood beside her, hands relaxed in his jacket pockets, his gaze steady, observing not the jewelry, but the people. Behind the counter, Vanessa Blake noticed them almost instantly, though she didn't move right away. Her trained eyes traveled from Emily's modest cardigan to Daniel's unbranded shoes, and something in her expression shifted, not openly rude, not yet, but subtly colder, like a door quietly closing. She approached with a smile that looked correct but felt rehearsed, the kind reserved for situations already judged. "Can I help you find something today?" she asked, her tone polite, but her eyes already dismissing them. Emily smiled back, soft and unbothered, her voice warm as she gestured toward a display. "Yes, I was hoping to take a closer look at that ring." Vanessa followed her gaze, then hesitated just long enough for the silence to say what her words didn't, before stepping slightly to the side instead of forward. "That collection is typically reserved for private viewings," she replied, her voice lowering, as if offering a gentle correction, though her posture made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, it was a boundary. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her for just a moment, then back to Emily, who remained composed, her expression unchanged, as though she had expected this moment before it even arrived. Around them, another couple entered, dressed in sharp designer pieces, and Vanessa's attention shifted almost instinctively, her shoulders straightening, her smile brightening in a way that hadn't been offered seconds ago. "If you'd like," she added quickly, turning back just enough to maintain formality, "we have some more accessible options over here." The word hung in the air, light but cutting, carefully chosen to sound helpful while quietly defining their place. Daniel didn't react, not outwardly, but his gaze sharpened just slightly, the kind of change only someone paying close attention would notice. And Emily simply nodded, her fingers resting gently against the glass case, as if she were considering something far beyond the jewelry itself. The room remained calm, the soft hum of polite conversation continuing around them. But beneath it, something had shifted, something quiet and irreversible, like a line that had just been crossed without anyone fully realizing it yet. And somewhere in that stillness, the first crack in Vanessa's certainty had already begun to form, though she couldn't see it, not yet. Vanessa gestured lightly toward a smaller display tucked near the corner of the showroom, where the lighting felt dimmer and the pieces noticeably less striking, as if even the room itself understood the quiet hierarchy being enforced, and Emily followed her gaze without resistance, though her eyes did not carry disappointment, only a calm awareness that seemed almost out of place in a moment designed to make her feel small. Daniel remained beside her, silent, his posture relaxed but grounded, the kind of stillness that did not come from uncertainty, but from control. "These pieces are more approachable," Vanessa continued, her voice smooth, each word carefully measured, though the faint pause before the last word revealed more truth than she intended, and Emily nodded gently, leaning slightly closer to the glass, her reflection blending with the jewelry beneath it, as though she were observing not the items themselves, but the situation unfolding around her. Across the showroom, the newly arrived couple laughed softly as Vanessa's colleague eagerly presented them with a velvet tray lined with brilliant diamonds. The contrast unmistakable, not just in service, but in energy, in attention, in respect, and for a brief moment, the entire space seemed divided into two separate worlds that existed side by side, yet followed entirely different rules. A young sales associate glanced toward Emily and Daniel, his expression uncertain, as if he sensed something was off but did not yet understand what. While Vanessa maintained her position, arms loosely crossed now, her smile thinning as she waited for them to either settle for less or quietly leave. "If you have a budget in mind, I can help narrow things down," she added, the question framed politely, yet carrying the quiet assumption that there must be a limit, that there always was for people like them. And Daniel's eyes shifted toward her again, this time holding for just a fraction longer, not confrontational, not offended, but observant, as though he were noting every detail with quiet precision. Emily straightened slightly, her fingers leaving the glass as she turned to Daniel, their eyes meeting in a brief exchange that required no words, something subtle passing between them, a silent understanding that seemed to reset the air around them, and Daniel gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, before reaching into his jacket. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, and for a moment, Vanessa's attention sharpened, curiosity flickering beneath her composed exterior, though she quickly masked it with the same practiced indifference, expecting perhaps a card, a polite excuse, or the familiar retreat she had seen countless times before. Instead, Daniel simply glanced down at his phone, his expression unchanged, and tapped the screen once. Then again, the quiet sound barely audible over the soft music playing in the background, and whatever message he sent, it carried no visible weight in that moment. No announcement, no explanation, just a simple action that seemed almost insignificant to anyone watching. Vanessa exhaled softly, already turning her attention back toward the more promising clients across the room, convinced the situation had resolved itself, that the couple would soon excuse themselves without further disruption. And yet, beneath the polished calm of the showroom, something unseen had already begun to move, subtle at first, like the faint shift of gears behind a locked door, and though no one noticed it yet, not the customers, not the staff, not even Vanessa, the balance of the room had already started to change, quietly, inevitably, and beyond her control. The first sign was so subtle that it almost blended into the rhythm of the store, a faint shift in the posture of the young sales associate near the register, his eyes flicking toward the back office as his tablet vibrated softly against the glass counter. And though he tried to ignore it, professionalism keeping his hands steady, the second vibration came sharper, more insistent, followed by a notification tone that did not belong to the calm, curated atmosphere of Beaumont Jewelers. He glanced down, and the color in his face changed instantly, not dramatically, but enough to betray that something unexpected had just entered the equation, something that did not align with the quiet assumptions that had filled the room just moments ago. Across the showroom, Vanessa was mid-sentence with the well-dressed couple, her voice flowing smoothly as she described the clarity and cut of a diamond, when she noticed the subtle tension ripple through her staff, a hesitation in movement, a glance exchanged between two employees that lingered just a second too long, and her polished confidence faltered for the briefest moment, though she quickly recovered, her smile tightening as she dismissed it as inexperience. Meanwhile, Emily stood exactly where she had been, her posture relaxed, her expression composed, as though she were simply waiting for something that had already been set in motion, her fingers loosely clasped in front of her, while Daniel remained beside her, his gaze drifting calmly across the showroom, taking in every reaction, every shift, every unspoken question forming in the air. The young associate stepped away from the counter, his pace measured but noticeably quicker than before, moving toward the back office door where he knocked once before entering without waiting for a response, a decision that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances, and within seconds, a second employee followed, then a third, each drawn by the same unseen signal that had begun to spread quietly through the system. Vanessa noticed now, fully, her attention breaking from her client as she turned slightly, her brows narrowing just enough to reveal irritation beneath her professionalism, and she excused herself with a practiced smile before stepping toward the back, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, each step carrying a growing sense of unease she could not yet explain. The showroom did not fall silent, not completely, but the energy shifted, conversations lowering, eyes drifting, as if the room itself had sensed a change in gravity, something pulling focus away from the diamonds and toward a moment that had not yet fully revealed itself. Then the back office door opened, and the store's supervisor stepped out, his usual composure replaced by a tight urgency that did not belong in a place built on calm luxury. His eyes scanning the room quickly before locking onto Daniel, and in that instant, something unmistakable passed across his face, recognition, sharp and undeniable, followed by a tension that suggested this was no ordinary customer interaction. He adjusted his tie instinctively, then began walking forward, not toward Vanessa, not toward the waiting clients, but directly toward the couple who had been quietly set aside. And though he tried to maintain control in his stride, there was a subtle stiffness in his movement, as if he understood that whatever was about to happen next would not be easily undone. And for the first time since they had entered the store, the balance of power shifted visibly, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with the quiet certainty of something irreversible unfolding in plain sight. And in the reflection of the glass cases, you could see it clearly, the moment where assumption began to collapse under the weight of truth. The supervisor stopped just a few feet in front of Daniel and Emily, his breath measured but slightly uneven, as if he had walked into a situation that demanded immediate correction yet required absolute precision in how it was handled. And for a brief moment, he said nothing, his eyes moving between the couple, as though confirming something he already suspected but could not afford to mistake. Then his posture shifted, shoulders straightening, expression tightening into something far more formal than anything Vanessa had offered since their arrival. "Good afternoon," he began, his tone carefully controlled, though the edge of urgency beneath it was impossible to ignore, and Daniel met his gaze calmly, offering nothing more than a quiet nod, while Emily remained still, her presence steady, almost grounding the moment in a way that contrasted sharply with the tension building around them. Across the showroom, Vanessa slowed her steps as she approached, her confidence returning just enough to assume she was about to take control of the situation, her eyes flicking briefly toward the supervisor with a silent expectation that he would reinforce the boundary she had already established. But something in his posture stopped her, a subtle shift in authority that did not align with what she had anticipated. "Is there an issue here?" she asked, her voice crisp, professional, though now carrying a faint trace of defensiveness. And the supervisor turned slightly toward her, just enough to acknowledge her presence without fully engaging, his focus remaining primarily on Daniel. "Mr. Carter," he said, the name landing softly but carrying weight that rippled outward through the room, and Vanessa froze, the smallest pause catching in her breath as the sound of that name settled into her awareness. Unfamiliar, yet spoken with a recognition she could not immediately place. Daniel inclined his head slightly, his expression unchanged, neither confirming nor denying, simply allowing the moment to unfold, and the supervisor continued, his voice lowering just enough to ensure discretion, though the silence of the showroom made every word feel amplified. "We were not expecting you today," he added, and there it was, the first clear fracture in the narrative. Vanessa had built in her mind, the first undeniable signal that something had been misunderstood at a fundamental level. Emily's eyes moved gently between the two men, her calm unwavering, as if she had witnessed this exact shift before in different rooms, under different lights, while Vanessa's composure began to thin, her mind racing to reconcile the pieces that no longer fit together. "I was just assisting them," she interjected quickly, stepping slightly forward, her tone sharpening in an attempt to regain control, but the supervisor raised his hand just enough to pause her, not dismissive, but firm, and in that small gesture, the hierarchy of the room rearranged itself completely. "I understand," he said, though his eyes never left Daniel, and for the first time since she had approached the couple, Vanessa felt something unfamiliar press against her certainty, a quiet, creeping realization that she might have misjudged more than just a customer. Around them, the other employees had grown still, their movements slowing, conversations fading into near silence as attention converged on the unfolding exchange, and even the well-dressed clients across the room glanced over, curiosity replacing their earlier ease. The supervisor took a measured breath, then spoke again, his tone now unmistakably respectful. "If you would allow me, I would like to personally assist you," he said, and the shift was complete, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. And in that moment, the polished surface of the showroom reflected something far more revealing than diamonds, It reflected the quiet collapse of assumption, the moment where judgment met consequence, and the room, though still filled with light, seemed to hold its breath. Daniel did not respond immediately, and that silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable, not because it was awkward, but because it carried weight, the kind that made everyone nearby suddenly aware that they were witnessing something far more significant than a routine customer interaction. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and unhurried, the tone of someone who never needed to raise it to be heard. "We were just looking," he said simply, his eyes meeting the supervisor's without challenge, yet without yielding, and Emily added nothing, her quiet presence reinforcing his words in a way that felt complete, as though nothing more needed to be explained. The supervisor nodded quickly, almost too quickly, his expression shifting into something more attentive, more careful, as he gestured subtly toward the central display cases, the ones Vanessa had kept out of reach moments earlier. "Of course," he said, his voice now carrying a clear respect that had been entirely absent before. "Please, allow me to show you our full collection." The word full lingered in the air, unmistakable in its implication, and Vanessa felt it land like a quiet correction, her posture stiffening as the reality of the situation began to settle in with increasing clarity. "They were already being assisted," she said, her voice tighter now, an edge of defensiveness slipping through despite her effort to maintain composure. And the supervisor turned his head slightly toward her, his expression controlled but firm. "I will handle this," he replied, not raising his voice, yet leaving no room for interpretation, and in that moment, the authority she had relied on shifted completely out of her grasp. Around them, the employees had gone still, their attention no longer hidden, while even the well-dressed clients across the showroom watched with quiet curiosity, sensing that something important was unfolding just beneath the surface. The supervisor stepped forward and carefully unlocked one of the main display cases, the soft click echoing more loudly than it should have in the silence. And as he lifted the glass, the light caught the diamonds inside, scattering reflections across the polished floor like fragments of something newly revealed. "This piece," he began, his voice measured, as he placed a velvet tray before Emily, "is part of our private collection, not typically displayed." And the contrast was undeniable, not just in the jewelry, but in the shift of treatment, the sudden accessibility of what had been moments ago declared unavailable. Emily looked down at the tray, her expression thoughtful but unchanged, her fingers gently brushing the edge of the velvet without immediately reaching for the ring, as though she were more interested in the moment than the object itself. And Daniel watched quietly, his gaze moving briefly toward Vanessa, not with accusation, but with a calm acknowledgement of what had just occurred. Vanessa stood frozen, her mind racing, replaying every word she had spoken, every glance she had given, each detail now taking on a new and unsettling significance. And for the first time, doubt replaced certainty, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet persistence that she could not ignore. "Is there anything specific you were hoping to find?" the supervisor asked, his tone now fully aligned with the level of service reserved for the most valued clients. And Emily finally looked up, her eyes steady, her voice soft yet clear as she replied, "Something meaningful." And the simplicity of her answer carried more weight than any price tag could measure, settling into the silence like a truth that needed no embellishment, while the room, still and watchful, seemed to lean in, waiting for what would happen next. The word meaningful lingered in the air, settling into the polished silence of the showroom like something far more valuable than any diamond beneath the glass. And for a moment, no one spoke, not the supervisor, not the employees, not even the well-dressed clients who had now fully turned their attention toward the quiet center of the room, where everything had shifted without warning. The supervisor nodded slowly, his expression softening with a level of respect that had not been present before, as though Emily's answer had confirmed something beyond status, beyond wealth, something that required no explanation yet demanded recognition. "Of course," he said, his voice lower now, more careful, as he reached for another case. This one positioned slightly apart from the others, its contents hidden behind an additional layer of security, and as he unlocked it, the faint metallic click echoed again, sharper this time, drawing even more eyes toward the moment. Inside, The pieces were different, not louder, not more extravagant, but refined in a way that spoke of intention rather than display. And he selected one ring in particular, placing it gently onto the velvet tray before Emily, his movements precise, almost reverent. "This design is not part of our public collection," he explained, choosing his words with care. "It was commissioned through a partnership that only a handful of people are aware of." And though he did not elaborate further, the implication was clear. This was not something offered, it was something recognized. Emily looked down at the ring, her gaze steady, her fingers hovering just above it before finally lifting it slightly, turning it in the light as if she were reading a story written into its form. And Daniel watched her, not with expectation, but with quiet understanding, as though he already knew what she would see. Behind them, Vanessa remained motionless, her thoughts unraveling in real time, each passing second adding another layer of realization that she had not only misjudged a customer, but had completely failed to recognize the nature of the moment she had been part of. And now, standing just a few feet away, she could feel the distance between what she had assumed and what was actually true growing wider with every word spoken. "You recognize it," the supervisor said carefully, his voice carrying a subtle note of confirmation rather than question, and Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile, not proud, not amused, but knowing. "I do," she replied softly, her eyes still on the ring. And that was all it took, the final piece falling into place without announcement, without spectacle, yet undeniable in its impact. The supervisor straightened immediately, his posture shifting into something even more formal, more deliberate, as if the air itself required a different level of respect now. And he stepped back half a pace, creating space not out of distance, but out of acknowledgement. Around them, the silence deepened, no longer casual, but charged, filled with the quiet awareness that something important had just been revealed, even if not everyone fully understood it yet. And in that stillness, the earlier assumptions felt almost distant, like something that no longer belonged in the same room. Vanessa swallowed subtly, her confidence gone, replaced by a growing clarity she could not escape. And for the first time since the couple had walked through the door, she realized that the situation was no longer something she could control, correct, or explain. It had already moved beyond her, beyond the store, into a space where truth did not need to be defended, it only needed to be seen. And the room, though unchanged in its appearance, felt entirely different, as if it were quietly witnessing the moment where everything finally made sense. Emily lowered the ring slightly, the light catching along its edge one last time before she placed it back onto the velvet tray with a calm precision that felt deliberate, as though she had already made a decision that did not need to be spoken aloud. And Daniel watched her with the same quiet understanding, his expression unchanged, steady, grounded, while the supervisor remained still, waiting, not interrupting, not assuming, his posture reflecting a level of restraint that only appeared in moments where the outcome carried weight beyond the immediate transaction. The silence stretched, not awkward, but full, charged with the awareness of everyone in the room who now sensed that something important had already happened, even if they could not fully explain it. And then Emily finally looked up, her eyes meeting the supervisor's with a calm clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "This was never meant for display," she said softly, her voice even, her tone neither accusing nor proud, simply stating something that felt like truth rather than opinion. And the supervisor's breath caught just slightly, the meaning settling into place with unmistakable precision. "No, it was not," he replied carefully, his voice lowering further, the formality in his posture now replaced with something closer to respect, to acknowledgement. And Daniel shifted his gaze briefly across the showroom, taking in the stillness, the employees frozen in quiet observation, the clients who had stopped pretending not to watch, and finally, Vanessa, who stood a few steps behind, her expression no longer guarded, no longer confident, but uncertain, her earlier certainty unraveling piece by piece under the weight of what she now understood she had overlooked. "You knew," the supervisor added after a moment, his voice measured, not as a question, but as a realization, and Emily gave the smallest nod, her hands resting calmly in front of her, her presence steady, unshaken by the attention that now surrounded her. "I helped design it," she said. The words spoken gently, without emphasis, yet they landed with a force that rippled through the room like a quiet shock. And for a moment, no one moved, no one spoke, the air itself seeming to pause as the full meaning settled into place. The supervisor stepped back instinctively, not out of distance, but out of respect, his posture straightening further, as if responding to a shift that required no instruction, and Daniel remained beside Emily, his silence now fully understood, not passive, not uncertain, but intentional, the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to prove anything in the first place. Across the room, the subtle sounds of movement returned, but slower now, more careful, as though everyone present had become aware that they were standing inside a moment that would not be easily forgotten. And Vanessa felt it most of all, the realization settling heavily in her chest, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable, as every glance she had given, every word she had chosen, replayed itself with new meaning. She took a small step forward, then stopped, unsure now of where she belonged in the situation she had once controlled, her voice absent, her certainty gone, replaced by something quieter, something more difficult to face. Emily did not look at her, not out of dismissal, but because she did not need to, and the absence of acknowledgement carried more weight than any confrontation could have, leaving the lesson unspoken yet unmistakably clear. And in the stillness that followed, the room no longer felt like a place of transaction, but a space where assumptions had quietly collapsed, revealing something far more lasting beneath them. The words settled into the room like a quiet verdict, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that left no room for doubt. And for a long moment, no one moved, as if the entire showroom had collectively paused to absorb the weight of what had just been revealed, the polished surfaces reflecting not just light, but the subtle unraveling of every assumption that had been made only minutes earlier. The supervisor lowered his gaze briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than submission, before looking back at Emily with a level of respect that was no longer professional, but personal, as though he understood that this moment extended far beyond a simple interaction between client and staff. "We are honored to have you here," he said quietly, the formality in his voice replaced with sincerity, and Daniel glanced at him for a moment, then gave a small nod, not accepting the statement as praise, but recognizing the shift in understanding behind it. Across the room, the well-dressed clients who had once commanded attention now stood silently, their earlier confidence softened into something more observant, more cautious, as if they too were reconsidering the way they measured worth in a place defined by appearance. Vanessa remained where she was, her hands no longer steady, her posture no longer controlled, the certainty that had guided her actions now replaced by a growing awareness that she had not only misjudged the couple, but had done so in a way that revealed more about herself than she had ever intended. She took a step forward, then another, her movement hesitant, as if crossing an invisible line that had once felt secure but now felt uncertain beneath her feet, and when she finally spoke, her voice was softer, stripped of the authority it once carried. "I did not realize," she began, the words incomplete, her eyes lowering for a brief moment before lifting again, searching for something she could not quite find, and Emily turned her head slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the sound of her voice without granting it full weight. "No," Emily said gently, her tone calm, not harsh, not dismissive, but clear, "you did not." And the simplicity of her response carried more meaning than any accusation could have, leaving Vanessa with nothing to defend against, nothing to argue, only the quiet truth of what had already happened. The supervisor remained still, saying nothing, understanding that this moment did not belong to him, that it required no intervention, no correction, only space for the reality of it to settle fully. And Daniel's gaze moved briefly across the room once more, noting the stillness, the silence, the way every detail now felt different, not because the space had changed, but because the perspective within it had shifted. Emily reached for the ring once more, holding it between her fingers, not as a symbol of wealth, but as something more personal, something tied to intention rather than status. And after a moment, she placed it back onto the tray, her decision quiet but unmistakable. "We will not be purchasing today," she said, her voice steady. And though the words were simple, They carried a finality that echoed through the room, not as rejection, but as consequence, and the supervisor inclined his head in understanding, offering no resistance, no persuasion, only acceptance of a moment that could not be undone. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, the realization settling fully now, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but deep. And when she opened them again, the room felt different, not because of what had been said, but because of what had been learned, and in the reflection of the glass cases, beneath the steady glow of carefully placed lights, there remained a silence that spoke louder than anything else, a silence shaped not by wealth, but by the quiet, undeniable presence of dignity. Daniel gave a small, almost imperceptible nod after Emily's words, and without another glance at the display, he turned slightly toward the entrance, his movement calm and unhurried, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred, yet the weight of the moment followed them with every step, carried in the silence that now filled the showroom more completely than any sound ever could. Emily walked beside him, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, not victorious, not disappointed, simply grounded in something deeper than the situation they were leaving behind. And, as they moved past the glass cases, the reflections shifted again, no longer capturing curiosity or judgment, but something quieter, something closer to reflection. The supervisor stepped aside instinctively, creating space for them to pass, his gesture precise and respectful, his eyes following them not out of obligation, but with a quiet understanding that this moment would remain with him long after the doors closed. "Thank you for coming in," he said softly, the words simple, yet carrying a sincerity that had not existed when they first arrived, and Daniel paused just long enough to acknowledge it with a brief nod. Nothing more, nothing needed. Behind them, no one spoke, the employees still, the clients silent, each person caught in their own realization, their own recalibration of what they had just witnessed, and Vanessa remained where she stood, unable to move immediately, her thoughts settling slowly into something that felt heavier than regret, not because it was dramatic, but because it was clear. She looked around the showroom, the same space she had controlled with confidence only minutes earlier, and for the first time, it felt unfamiliar, not in its appearance, but in its meaning, as though the rules she had relied on no longer held the same certainty. The door chimed again as Daniel and Emily stepped outside, the soft sound echoing briefly before fading into the quiet, and the light from the street filtered in for a moment, blending with the controlled glow inside before the doors closed behind them, sealing the space once more. No one moved right away. The supervisor exhaled slowly, then turned back toward the staff, his expression composed, though something in his eyes had shifted, a recognition that could not be undone, and without raising his voice, without assigning blame, he simply said, "We will review today," his tone even, measured, and Vanessa lowered her gaze, not in fear, not in panic, but in understanding, the kind that does not require explanation, only acceptance. She stepped back from the display, her hands now still, her posture quieter, and though no one addressed her directly, the lesson remained, present in every reflection, every silence, every unspoken acknowledgement that had filled the room. Outside, Daniel and Emily continued walking down the sidewalk, their pace steady, their conversation absent, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said, and as they disappeared into the flow of the afternoon, the world moved on around them without knowing what had just taken place inside those glass doors. Back in the showroom, the lights remained the same, the diamonds unchanged, but something invisible had shifted, something that would linger long after the moment itself had passed, and in the quiet that followed, there was no applause, no confrontation, no grand declaration, only a stillness that carried a single, undeniable truth, that respect is never defined by what someone wears, but by how you choose to see them when you think they have nothing to offer. And on that day, in that room, that truth had spoken louder than anything else ever could.